Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Abhineet Shukla and with me is Saira Mujtaba, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. India to host G20 summit in New Delhi in September 2023 to hold over 200 meetings after assuming G20 presidency for 1 year from 1st of December. Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says multilateral institutions like World Bank and IMF should make themselves relevant in post-pandemic world. India and China complete disengagement in Gogra Hot Springs area in Ladakh. India and Japan conduct 6th edition of maritime exercise GIMEX in Bay of Bengal. Nearly 50 Armenian soldiers killed in fierce clashes with Azerbaijan. FATF rates Pakistan low on 10 out of 11 international goals on anti-money laundering and combating terror finance. And in women's cricket, second T20 international between India and England to be played in Derby in a short while from now. India will host the G20 Leaders Summit at the level of heads of state and government on 9th and 10th of September next year in New Delhi. India will assume the presidency of the G20 for 1 year from the 1st of December this year to the 30th of November next year. It is expected to host over 200 G20 meetings across the country. More from our correspondent.
The G20 is an intergovernmental forum of the world's major developed and developing economies. It comprises 19 countries including Australia, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, UK, USA and the European Union. Collectively, the G20 accounts for 85% of global GDP, 75% of international trade and two-thirds of the world population, making it the premier forum for international economic cooperation. India is currently part of the G20 Troika comprising Indonesia, Italy and India. During the presidency, India, Indonesia and Brazil will form the Troika. This will be the first time when the Troika would consist of 3 developing countries and emerging economies, providing them a greater voice. With Dipendra Kumar, this is Anuj Sharma for AIR News.
India will invite Bangladesh as a guest country to take part in the G20 meeting during its presidency. Announcing this in Delhi on Tuesday, India's Ministry of External Affairs said that as part of the G20 tradition of inviting some guest countries and international organizations to its meetings and summit, India has decided to invite Bangladesh, Egypt, Mauritius, Netherlands, Nigeria, Oman, Singapore, Spain and UAE as guest countries. In today's Hotspot section, we have an exclusive interview with Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa and former CEO Niti Aayog on India's presidency at G20 Summit 2023. The interviewer is Dr. Atul Kumar Tiwari, AIR Special Correspondent.
Namaskar and welcome to this edition of Hotspot. India will host the G20 Summit on 9th and 10th September next year. In about 3 months from now, India will be assuming the Group of 20 year-long presidency from 1st of December 2022 till 30th of November next year. The forthcoming months will witness India hosting more than 200 meetings with hundreds of ministers, officials, diplomats, businessmen, NGOs, working groups and engagement groups of G20, which is comprised of 19 powerful economies and the European Union. Collectively, the G20 accounts for 85% of global GDP, 75% of international trade and two-thirds of the world's population, making it the premier forum for international economic cooperation. Every rotating G20 presidency also serves as the G20 Secretariat for the year. Accordingly, the Union Cabinet on 15th of February this year approved the setting up of a G20 Secretariat manned by officers and staff from the Ministry of External Affairs, Ministry of Finance and other concerned ministries and departments dealing with G20 subjects. As the G20 President, India will set the agenda for the year, identify the themes and focus areas, conduct discussions and work out outcome documents. India has hosted large international conferences in the past, but let us see what new doors will open for the country with the G20 Summit presidency. Today we have with us G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, India will be holding the presidency of G20 summit in December this year. What is the significance and the underlining message?
This is a very important role as the presidency of G20 because G20 countries account for almost 85% of the global GDP. They account for about 75% of the trade. They account for almost 90% of the global patents, and they account for almost 65% of the global population. So G20 countries are very, very significant. They are very important. They drive the global economy. And what is decided in G20 really shapes the future of the world. This is a very, very important presidency year because there are global conflicts right now. There is a huge amount of restructuring of the global supply chains. There is global debt, which is at an all-time high. And therefore, the challenges before the G20 are to accelerate the pace of inclusive and sustainable growth. There is a challenge of ensuring that there is climate action and that there is an adequate amount of flow of climate financing to emerging markets and developing countries. There's also the challenge of using technology to leapfrog, and how do we accelerate the pace of this technology acceleration across all countries. And also, due to COVID, a vast number of people across the world were left behind in education, health, nutrition, and therefore accelerating the pace of sustainable development goals will also be a key challenge.
Sir, you have emphasized in the past the need for all G20 member nations to selectively address health, food, and energy security challenges in an urgent, cooperative, and equitable manner. And it will be a challenging task to obtain cooperation from all. How do you plan to undertake this challenge?
So this is a key challenge both on issues of digital health, on issues of ensuring that the world works together as far as health outcomes are concerned. There's also the challenge of education outcomes which have got impacted. There's also the challenge of nutrition. And there's also a challenge of cooperating across the world because you also have to ensure that the whole world is vaccinated, that the world does not face another pandemic in the future. There is also the challenge of ensuring that preventive care is taken. And all these are challenges which will be discussed, and the pace of acceleration will be strengthened so that there is adequate taking care of the population of the world. That is G20's challenge. The challenge is not merely on the health side, but accelerating the pace of the implementation of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Because if the world has to go forward, if the world has to grow and expand, it has to be inclusive and equitable growth. India has been saying that it has to be sustainable, but it has to be inclusive, it has to be equitable. And this growth needs to be accelerated by all countries of the world. Now, this would require a vast amount of financing along with climate financing. And therefore, climate financing and financing for SDG holds really the key to growth of the future.
Sir, you spoke about climate financing and financing for the goals related to SDG. Yet another important factor has been in terms of the financial regulations. How India will be eyeing to address the methods to boost its digital economy and improve the cross-border financial or transitional transparency, and that too when we are looking at a $5 trillion economy in the years to come.
So India provides a huge learning lesson because it has ensured that it builds up digital public goods. It has ensured that there's digital identification of all its population. 1.4 billion people have digital identity. It has ensured consent-based digitization, and therefore everybody gives consent. And thirdly, it has ensured fast payments. What India has demonstrated is that through open source, open architecture, it has been able to build up strong APIs. And this has led to very, very strong movement forward as far as both identification, as far as digital payments through UPI, as far as several other apps like DigiLocker, CoWIN, many other are concerned. And therefore, what India has demonstrated to the world is that you can use digitization to leapfrog. And therefore, India provides a unique opportunity through digital public goods, where the public good is the track which is owned by the government, on top of which the private sector innovates. So India is the only country in the world where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, where WhatsApp competes with Paytm. And therefore, our belief is that the trunk infrastructure must be created by the government, and on top of which we should allow private sector to innovate. What India has achieved in the last 6 to 7 years would have normally taken India about 60 to 70 years. But India has really accelerated the pace of digital transformation. This is a lesson for many other countries of the world. And we need to bring what we have done to the knowledge of the world, that this is possible to technologically leapfrog, and that the data being owned by big tech, we need data to be owned by individuals, and that consent is critical, and that digital identification is required, and almost 3 billion people across the world need digital identification. So these are huge lessons which the Indian narrative brings out. And during our presidency, we'll use this opportunity to spell out the India narrative in many of these things.
So, India's G20 priorities are being firmed up with previous conversations that revolve around sustainable growth and the lifestyle for environment or life, as spelled out by the Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi. He has been very vocal about life. How much or less this we are going to see to be discussed about lifestyle for environment in the G20 summit under India's presidency?
Lifestyle for environment, life will be center stage. It will be one of the key priorities of the government, the key priority for India, because we strongly believe that the developed world is talking about 2050, and it has fixed up long-term goals, whereas we need individual movement forward, and we need actually annual action plans which will be based on individual transformation. There's a lot of wastage in the world. There's a lot of changing of lifestyle required. All this is necessary because only with change of lifestyles, when individuals take ownership, then only there'll be a change in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation. All this requires behavioral change. All this requires nudging of individuals. And therefore, India truly believes that lifestyle for environment will be a very critical agenda in its G20 presidency.
So as India celebrates its 75 years of independence, it's indeed a proud moment for all of us to be ushering into a new year in 2023 with the G20 summit. Your message for the people?
My message to the people is that G20 presidency is India's unique opportunity. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really project, brand, and present the best face of India as a progressive nation which is transforming itself in the next one generation, as the Prime Minister said. It's Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and we should use this period and the period of G20 presidency to give a huge impetus to growth, progress, and improving livelihoods in India.
Thanks a lot, sir. Well, listeners, that was Sri Amitabh Kant, G20 Sherpa, sharing insights into the G20 summit scheduled to be held in India next year. Thanks for joining with us, sir, and sharing your valuable time with All India Radio.
Thank you.
In some more news, Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman on Tuesday said that it is time for multilateral institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to make themselves relevant in the post-pandemic world. The minister was speaking at the release of a book in New Delhi. Earlier, speaking at the 15th edition of the Mind Summit in New Delhi on Tuesday, Ms. Sitharaman said the Indian government will do everything for the industry to come and invest in the country.
A lot more companies moving out of China, wanting to come because they find the policies a lot more attractive, not just the PLI, but overall the ecosystem is now far more facilitative of such companies coming out to locate themselves in India. If that is one of the things. The second, I think, no policy can be the end to itself. It's not as if we've given a solution and that's the end of the story. It keeps evolving as we go on. So that applies even to those industries which are coming into the sunrise sector, for which we've given the policy support through an incentive.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO Summit will be held in the historic Uzbek city of Samarkand on the 15th and 16th of September. At the upcoming event, the leaders of the SCO countries will come together for the first time in 3 years in a face-to-face format. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be attending the SCO summit in Uzbekistan and is also likely to hold a few bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the summit. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin will be among the 15 heads of state and the heads of 10 international organizations that work in cooperation with the SCO who will attend the Samarkand summit to discuss bilateral, regional and global issues that have accumulated since the start of the COVID pandemic, causing serious shifts both in geopolitics and geoeconomics. According to a report from the Chinese state TV, total trade value of SCO member states increased from just $667 billion in 2001 to a whopping $6 trillion in 2020. SCO Secretary General Zhang Ming, in an interview to Chinese state TV on Monday, said many countries are interested in joining the SCO. Iran is likely to sign a memorandum of obligations to join the SCO as a member. Belarus has also applied for membership. In addition, memorandums on granting dialogue partner status will be signed with Egypt, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. The approval of applications for partner status is also expected with Bahrain and the Maldives.
Indian and Chinese armies have stepped their troops back from the front line of the Gogra Hot Springs area's patrolling point 15 in the eastern Ladakh region. Quoting army sources, our Leh correspondent reports that the disengagement process was underway for 5 days that included dismantling of the temporary structures and bringing the frontline troops to the rear locations respectively by both the armies. As per the plan, a joint verification of the process was also entailed by the two sides as they disengaged from the face-off site. On the 8th of September, both the sides announced beginning of the process. India has expressed its concern over the lack of any measurable progress by the Sri Lankan government on its commitment towards reaching a political situation on the Tamil issue. India's permanent representative to the UN in Geneva, Indramani Pandey, outlined India's position at an interactive dialogue on the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights' latest report on Sri Lanka. Mr. Pandey said that India has always believed in the responsibility of countries to promote and protect human rights and constructive international dialogue and cooperation guided by the principles of the UN Charter. India said its consistent view on peace and reconciliation in the neighbouring island nation has been for a political settlement within the framework of a united Sri Lanka. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Welcome back to the news. The 6th edition of Japan-India Maritime Exercise 2022, JIMEX, hosted by Indian Navy, began in the Bay of Bengal on Sunday. The Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force JMSDF ships are being led by retired Admiral Hirata Toshiyuki, Commander Escort Flotilla 4, and Indian naval ships by Admiral Sanjay Bhalla, Flag Officer commanding Eastern Fleet. The Indian naval ships welcomed JMSDF ships Izumo, a helicopter carrier, and Takanami, a guided missile destroyer, on their arrival in the Bay of Bengal. The Indian Navy is being represented by 3 indigenously designed and built warships, Sahyadri, a multi-purpose stealth frigate, and anti-submarine warfare corvettes Karmat and Kavaratti. JIMEX 22 involves 2 phases, exercises at sea and a harbour phase at Visakhapatnam. This edition marks the 10th anniversary of JIMEX, which began in Japan in 2012. It also coincides with the 70th anniversary of establishing of diplomatic relations between India and Japan. INS Satpura and P-821 maritime patrol aircraft arrived in Darwin in Australia to participate in the multinational naval ex-Kakadu hosted by the Royal Australian Navy. The 2-week-long exercise, both in harbour and sea, involves ships and maritime aircraft from 14 navies. During the harbour phase of the exercise, the ship's crew will engage in operational planning interactions and sports activities with participating navies.
Armenia on Tuesday said that nearly 50 of its soldiers have been killed in the worst clashes with Azerbaijan since the end of their war 2 years ago. The fighting was the worst since the end of a 2020 war between the ex-Soviet republics over the contested Nagorno-Karabakh region that left more than 6,500 killed on both the sides. After several hours of fierce border fighting overnight, Armenia appealed to the world leaders for help, saying Azerbaijani forces were trying to advance on its territory. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan addressed Parliament on the issue on Tuesday morning. Mr. Pashinyan also called on French President Emmanuel Macron Russian President Vladimir Putin and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to demand an adequate reaction to what it termed as aggressive acts of Azerbaijan. Responding to the country's call for help and intervention, Russia said it has succeeded in bringing the clashes to a halt, with the foreign ministry in Moscow saying a ceasefire had been agreed. Pakistan, which is on the grey list of the Paris-based international watchdog Financial Action Task Force (FATF), faltered on 4 of its goals regarding anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terror. The media report said the Asia-Pacific Group APG on money laundering has rated Pakistan's level of effectiveness as low on 10 out of 11 international goals, even though the country is now compliant with 38 out of 40 technical recommendations. The APG noted that Pakistan had low effectiveness on 10 immediate outcomes IOs under international standards against money laundering and terror financing.
Over the past 75 years since independence, India's largest public service broadcaster, All India Radio, has been the proverbial storyteller for the 1.3 billion citizens across the country. All India Radio is celebrating 75 years of freedom with a series, Azad Bharat Ki Baat, Akashvani Ke Saath. It showcases the journey of India since independence in various walks of life through storytelling of AIR. In Tuesday's episode, we will bring you the story of economic reforms in India.
The economic reforms in India in 1991 led to the liberalization of the economy and significant improvement in its growth rate. These reforms, started by the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, had 3 main objectives: liberalization, privatization and globalization.
It is the future we have to think about, in fact, worry about. India has undertaken the first steps to shaping of our history for the next generation. After decades of centralized economic policies, India recently embarked on a reform program designed to modernize our economy, liberalize trade and realize our economic potential. We welcomed private investment and competition and encouraged free market growth. As a result, India is becoming globally competitive and the standard of living of our citizens is gradually on the rise. The momentum of these reforms will carry India into the next century as the single largest free market in the world.
These reforms aimed to enhance the cooperation of the private sector in the growth of the Indian economy. Liberalization opened economic borders to foreign companies. From 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is striving to make India a $5 trillion economy.
$5 trillion आज एक टारगेट उसको हमारे सामने हमने रखा है. हमारे लिए $5 trillion इकोनॉमी ये महज आंकड़ा नहीं है, बल्कि सामान्य भारतीय को सशक्त करने का माध्यम है. अर्थव्यवस्था दोगुनी होगी तो हर भारतीय परिवार की आय भी बढ़ेगी. सामान्य से सामान्य भारतीय की परचेजिंग पावर भी बढ़ेगी. $5 trillion के इस पड़ाव तक पहुंचने के लिए हमारे पास पोटेंशियल भी है और प्लान भी है और पसीना बहाने की पूरी तैयारी भी है.
According to International Monetary Fund, IMF, India has overtaken the UK to become the world's 5th largest economy and is now behind only the US, China, Japan and Germany. Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat initiatives are giving massive push to keep the country self-reliant. As a result, GDP is steadily improving, inflation is kept under check, employment generated and people's standard of living is improving tremendously.
Iconic French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard died at the age of 91 in Switzerland. The news was confirmed on Tuesday by one of his relatives. Jean-Luc Godard revolutionized popular cinema in 1960 with his debut feature Breathless and stood for years as one of the world's most vital and provocative directors.
Indian government's 75-day-long ongoing coastal cleanup campaign is receiving a huge response from all sections of the society. Addressing a press briefing in New Delhi today, India's Earth Science Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh said the government is gearing for a mass cleanliness campaign on International Coastal Cleanliness Day on the 17th of this month. The minister has sought support from the people in achieving the target to remove 1,500 tons of garbage, mainly single-use plastic, from the seacoasts on International Coastal Cleanup Day.
Since we were entering into Amrit Kal, I thought we could have a 75-day campaign dedicated to coastal cleaning. We have International Coastal Cleanup Day, which is being annually observed right from 1985, and it is observed on the third Saturday of every September. So when I looked at the calendar, what immediately struck me was the third Saturday was 17th of September, which also happened to be the birthday of the Honorable Prime Minister.
At the stock markets, key indices rose for the fourth straight day today, and the rupee posted sharp gains against the dollar. A report from the Business Desk.
At the stock markets, rising for the fourth straight day, the Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange climbed 456 points or 0.8% to close at a 5-month high of 60,571 today. The Nifty at the National Stock Exchange added 134 points or 0.8% to 18,070. Among other global stock markets, key indices in Asian markets ended mostly higher. So Japan's Nikkei index inched up 0.3%. China's Shanghai Composite Index ended marginally higher. South Korea's Kospi Index jumped 2.7%, and Singapore's Straits Times Index rose 0.5% higher in intraday trade. But Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index shed 0.2%. In Europe's London's FTSE had gained 0.1%, France's CAC had inched up 0.3%, and Germany's DAX had added 0.2% in intraday trade. Global crude oil prices rose today as worries about tight fuel supplies ahead of winter offset investor concerns about falling demand in China. So the Brent crude oil futures climbed $1.31 to $95.31 a barrel. The U.S. crude futures added $1.30 to $89.08 a barrel. And at the forex market, the rupee surged 38 paise to end at over a month high of 79 rupees and 15 paise against the dollar. Rajesh Lake for World News, All India Radio.
On to sports now. In women's cricket, the second T20 international of the three-match series between India and England is underway at Derby. England were 29 for 3 in 6 overs when reports last came in. Earlier, the hosts won the toss and opted to bat first. England have taken a 1-0 lead in the series, defeating visitors by 9 wickets. Both the teams will play 3 ODI matches after the T20 series.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post reports Russian retreat in northeast fuels cautious optimism for Kiev and allies. The Guardian writes King Charles III greets crowds near Belfast as anti-monarchy campaigners plan protests before coronation. The Globe and Mail writes that Chinese President Xi to meet Russian President Putin and shore up support in Central Asia. South China Morning Post reports as China vows to boost economy, crippling zero-COVID policy may be more zealously implemented. The Financial Times writes OPEC says oil sell-off driven by erroneous signals in markets, and the Japan Times writes amid energy challenges and green shift, Japan eyes new nuclear tech. A quick look at the headlines once again. India to host G20 summit in New Delhi in September 2023 to hold over 200 meetings after assuming G20 presidency for 1 year from the 1st of December. Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman says multilateral institutions like World Bank and IMF should make themselves relevant in post-pandemic world. India and China complete disengagement in Gogra Hot Springs area in Ladakh. India and Japan conduct 6th edition of maritime exercise GIMEX in Bay of Bengal. Nearly 50 Armenian soldiers killed in fierce clashes with Azerbaijan. FATF rates Pakistan low on 10 out of 11 international goals on anti-money laundering and combating terror finance. And in women's cricket, second T20 international between India and England underway in Derby. And now before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishno Jan by artists from Costa Rica. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.